To Polity Mains Class Lecture 5. Before discussing the questions, let us discuss few important topics. Prime Minister. Prime Minister is the head of the government. We have President as the head of the state. And there are certain articles which are related to the Prime Minister with respect to appointment. His powers are mentioned, functions of the Prime Minister. Now the articles are Article 74. Here, Article 74 is Prime Minister, Council of Minister, and we have the President. Three parties are involved in Article 74. Now we have the Council of Ministers, which includes Prime Minister and other ministers, to aid and advise the President. Now we have the Council of Ministers with the Prime Minister to aid and advise the President. This is Article 74. The Council of Ministers, they are advising the President, and the President shall exercise his functions in accordance with such advice. The Prime Minister is the head of the Council of Ministers. Now, the President may require the Council of Ministers to reconsider such an advice. This is by the 78th Constitutional Amendment Act. And the President shall act in accordance with the advice tendered after such reconsideration. Now we have Article 75. Other provisions as to ministers. Now, first, the Prime Minister is appointed by the President, right? And other ministers are appointed by the President on the advice of the Prime Minister. The minister hold the office during the pleasure of the President, but here the pleasure of the President is bound to the advice rendered by the Prime Minister. Council of Ministers, they are collectively responsible to the House of the People. So, Article 75 is very important. Like how the appointment of the president is appointed by the prime minister, then how the council of ministers is appointed and they are responsible for the president. That is what we call it as a pleasure. So this is having the first important point, second important point, and the third important, and again the fourth one is they are responsible to the house of the people. Salaries and of the ministers shall be such as Parliament from time to time determine. Here we also have the salaries and allowances. So far we have seen two articles, 74 and 75. 74 mentions that the president aid and advice of the Council of Ministers. And in 75, first how the Prime Minister is appointed, Council of Ministers is appointed. They are working under the pleasure of the President. And finally, we have they are responsible, the Council of Ministers are responsible to the Parliament. Their salaries and allowances are determined by the Parliament. So, Article 75 is very important. Now we have Article 78. We have to furnish the information to the President. So, the working of the Prime Minister, he needs to furnish the informations regarding his duties to the President. This is mandatory. Article 74 is where the President is bound to the advice of the Council of Ministers. Article 75 is Prime Minister, Council of Ministers, President's pleasure, and Parliament. 78, directly we go to 78, is where we have the duties of the Prime Minister must be furnished to the President. The duties must be furnished to the President. It shall be the duty of the Prime Minister to communicate to the President all the decisions of the Council of Ministers relating to administration of the affairs of the Union and proposals for legislation. The Prime Minister shall furnish such information relating to the administration of the affairs of Union and proposals for the legislature as the President may call for. For the President so requires, Prime Minister shall submit the consideration of the Council of Ministers any matter on which a decision is taken by the Minister but which has not been considered by the Council. So first, whenever Prime Minister is taking a decision, he needs to inform it to the President. And whenever there are council of ministers, they are taking some decision, they need to inform to the president. Council of ministers, that is prime minister along with the council of ministers. Right. Now the prime minister is there, president is there. In council of ministers, we have various ministers. Now a decision has been taken by a minister. A minister takes a decision. This decision must be communicated to the council of ministers. Right. So the president requires the prime ministers. The prime ministers should submit this decision to the council of ministers. This is required by the president. Now we are coming to Article 77. Now what are the important articles? 74 is the president, advice of the aid and advice of the council of ministers. Here we say the appointment, salaries and pleasure of president. They are responsible, pleasure and responsible. Article 78 is important, where we have provisions related to furnishing information. Article 74. The conduct of the business of Government of India. The executive functions of the Government of India are taken in the name of the President. This article is related to the President. All the executive decisions is taken in the name of the President. Orders and other instruments made and executed in the name of the President is authenticated in such a manner, the authentication manner which is specified in rules to be made by the President. President shall make rules for the convenient transaction of the business of the Government of India and for allocation among the ministers of said business. Now here we can have a MCQ. Who is making rules with respect to the transaction of business of Government of India? The President makes rules. So the President has to make rules for the convenient transaction of business. Who makes rules? The President makes rules for the convenient transaction of the business of Government of India. So Article 77 is where this is related to President actually, and all the business of the House is taken in the name of President. Executive actions. The President should make rules for the transaction of the business of Government of India. Article 88 is related to rights of the ministers as respect the House. This is again important with respect to Council of Ministers, ministers in general. Minister and even the Attorney General of India is having the right to speak and take part in the proceedings of either House, joint sitting of the House, any committee of the Parliament of which he may be named, by not by virtue of this article to be entitled to vote. The voting is with respect to Attorney General, but he is not entitled to vote. That's it. Now here we say the rights of, they mention that ministers as well as Attorney General. Attorney General is having an article of 76. So we say why 76 and 77 is missing. All the executive actions of the Government of India is taken under the name of the President. Now we know what is 75 and 74. Pleasure of President, responsibility to the Parliament. 74 is where we have Council of Ministers, aid and advice, President. 78. Prime Minister must furnish information to President. Now in 76 we are mentioning, which is Attorney General, we are mentioning only the presence of Attorney General. His powers are mentioned in 88 with respect to parliament. That is, he has the power to attend the proceedings of the parliament and he also has the right to speak in the parliament. He has the right to speak in the parliament. So, Attorney General of India and the parliament is related to Article 88. Now, few cases which are respect to Prime Minister. Why we are bringing S.R. Bommai case, which is related to promulgation of ordinance, right? Ordinance making power of the president is what we deal with S.R. Bommai case. And when president is making ordinance, ordinance is also related to federalism. So S.R. Bommai case can be related to federalism as well. Here, again in this landmark judgment, the scope of president's power under Article 356 and the role of Prime Minister and Council of Ministers in advising the President. The judgment reinforced the principle of collective responsibility of Council of Ministers to the Lok Sabha. They are collectively responsible to the Parliament in general, but Lok Sabha in particular, we have it Article 75. So we can remember in S.R. Bommai case, it reinforced the principle of collective responsibility. So we have a principle of collective responsibility of Council of Ministers to the he is collectively responsible to the Lok Sabha. Council of Ministers are collectively responsible to the Lok Sabha. Indira Nehru Gandhi versus Raj Narain. This is a Prime Minister 1975. Whereas S.R. Bommai case is 1994. Year is very important. S.R. Bommai case is 1994. Indira Gandhi case is 1975. After this case by the Allahabad judgment, emergency was promulgated. Election of the Prime Minister. Election of the Prime Minister Indira Gandhi and her subsequent disqualification by Allahabad High Court. We have disqualification is being ruled out by Allahabad High Court. The Supreme Court rulings had significant implications for this is electoral laws and Prime Minister's office PMO. Now we have amendments. While the specific relations articles related to prime ministers have not seen any amendments, various constitutional amendments have an indirect impact on the role and the functioning of the prime minister's office. We have 44th constitutional amendment 1978. I am sorry. Previously we have the president asks for reconsideration once. Article 74. It is 74th Constitutional Amendment Act. I have mentioned it as it is 44th Constitutional Amendment Act. I have mentioned it as 48th Constitutional Amendment Act. Now we have 44th Constitutional Amendment Act 1978, which curtailed the scope of emergency powers. Because during emergency, the Prime Minister must take the advice of Council of Ministers during the emergency. What is the conclusion? Prime Minister of India, he holds certain position in the Indian political system with constitutional provisions clearly outlining in appointment powers and responsibilities. These articles ensure a balance of power. We are having balance of power, collective responsibility, accountability. Balance of power is President, Prime Minister, Council of Ministers are discussed. So, balance of power, collective responsibility, Article 75, accountability is also Article 75, reinforcing the Prime Minister's pivotal role in the governance where he needs to convey the information to the President, right? It is Article 78. The dynamic nature of the Indian politics and judicial interpretations continues to shape the office. What are the judicial interpretations? The first is S.R. Bommai case, 1994, and the second one is Indira Nehru Gandhi versus Raj Narain case of 1975. And we also have 44th Constitutional Amendment Act in 1978. This act mentions that um, Prime Minister, while declaring the emergency, must consider the advice of Council of Ministers. Now, articles related to Council of Ministers, we already see Article 74. Council of Ministers are headed by the Prime Ministers and they play a crucial role in the executive branch of the government. The Indian Constitution provides several articles that detail the composition, responsibilities, and powers of the Council of Ministers. Additionally, various amendments and Supreme Court judgments have clarified and interpreted these provisions. Now we have Article 74, Article 75, which we have discussed previously. Same Article 77, the conduct of the business of Government of India. The executive actions. So Article 74, 75, 76, 77, 78. 77 is related to the president, but here the main reason it is being here is because president is bound to the advice of council of ministers. First thing, and the president must allocate the ministers of said business. This is the reason why it is present in Prime Minister as well as Council of Ministers articles. Now we know that the conduct of the business of Government of India, it is under the executive head president. Now the president is to make the rules for the more convenient transaction of the business of Government of India. Who makes rules? The president makes the rules for the convenient transaction of the business of Government of India and for the allocation among the ministers of the said business. Article 78, the duty Prime Minister to furnish the information. He is the head of the Council of Ministers, right? So the Prime Minister must also submit for consideration to the Council of Ministers on any matter when which a decision has been taken by the minister but which has not been considered by the council. Rights of the ministers as the respect of the house. Ministers and the Attorney General of the India have the right to speak and take part in the proceedings of either house, joint sitting committee in which his name is mentioned. But the Attorney General is not entitled to vote. Amendments. This is related to Council of Ministers. Article 74 is amended here. The President to act in accordance with the advice of Council of Ministers. Previously, we said President had some discretion, but this amendment curtailed it, reinforcing the role of Council of Ministers. The President must act. Now we say that the President must act in accordance with the advice of the Council of Ministers. So this is Article 74 which has been amended by 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act of 1976. 44th Constitutional Amendment Act of 1978. The amendment restored the power of the President to ask Council of Ministers to reconsider its advice. S.R. Bommai case again. So S.R. Bommai case and Union of India is related to President's rule. We have the S.R. Bommai case is related to the President's rule, right? The President's rule in 1994 we have a case and this is related to the President's rule. S.R. Bommai case is related to the President's rule. The Supreme Court emphasized the importance of federalism. President's rule affects federalism and the collective responsibility of Council of Ministers. It also asserted that the President's power to dismiss a state government is not absolute and must be exercised. It is not absolute, so it is subject to judicial review. Powers. President's power, Article 356, with respect to President's rule, State emergency affects federalism, right? Now, what is here in the Prime Minister's heading? We also had the SR Bommai case. Article 356 and the role of the Prime Ministers and Council of Ministers in advising the President. Previously, we had only Prime Minister. Now, both the Prime Minister and Council of Ministers are also providing advice, right, for the President's rule. They provide advice, and this is related to federalism. They are collectively responsible to the Lok Sabha, collective responsibility to the Lok Sabha. Now, this is a very important case. So, what are the judgments of SR Bommai case? We have to know that this case was in 1994. The first one is the President's Rule. Article 356. This is related to federalism. President's Rule may be also mentioned as state emergency. Right. Third one is Prime Minister and Council of Ministers are having collective responsibility to Lok Sabha because the presidents and council of the prime minister and the council of ministers, they advise the president with respect to emergency. 356. So these are the important points related to SR Bommai case of 1994. Now, let us discuss another case. Shamsher Singh versus State of Punjab. The Supreme Court ruled the President of India and the Governor are bound to the advice of the Council of Ministers except in certain exceptional cases. Principle of collective responsibility and limited discretion of the President and the Governor. This case in 1974. Shamsher Singh. This is even before 1976 amendment. We have 1976, like the 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act. So even before this, they are bound to the advice of the Council of Ministers. Even before this, they are bound to the advice of the Council of Ministers, which has been reiterated with the Shamsher Singh versus the State of Punjab 1976. 1974 is the case. Shams, Shamsher Singh versus State of Punjab 1974. In 1976, we had this amendment. What does it say? It says that the President and even the Governor are bound to the advice of Council of Ministers. We have here collective responsibility. Plus, we also have limited discretion. They act in their discretion, right? The discretion is limited over here. UN Rao case. UNR Rao versus Indira Gandhi, 1971. Now, this case clarified that a person who is not a member of parliament can be appointed as minister, but he must become a member within 6 months, failing to which they would cease to be the member. The judgment emphasized the link between legislative accountability and ministerial appointments. You cannot appoint a person who is not the member of parliament as a minister because we do not follow American presidential form where the a random person who does not belongs to the who does not belongs to the parliament is made a minister. So here he must be appointed within 6 months, failing to which he would cease to be a minister. Now, for Council of Ministers, it is led by the President. Council of Ministers led by the Prime Minister is a fundamental component of the executive branch of India, is responsible for aiding and advising the President and managing the administration of the country. The constitutional provisions, along with the key amendments and Supreme Court judgments, underscore the principle of collective responsibility, legis- legislative accountability, and limited discretion of the President in acting on the advice of the Council. These elements ensure a robust and balanced executive framework essential for effective governance in a parliamentary democracy. Next topic we have to see is very important, which is related to the role of the speaker in state legislative assembly. This we will see in the next class.